This is a 1991 1600 Mazda MX5 engine, actually left over from a two-donor build of a MEV replica. I initially just hooked up the ECU and wiring to check some ECU circuits, but then realised that all I needed was a fuel pump to be able to start the engine up, so I thought we'd do a few experiments with it. Also, it gave me a chance to break out my old gauges. We have a fuel pressure gauge, oil pressure gauge, manifold pressure gauge, an ammeter and a voltmeter hooked up. We also have a charge warning light down here. The charge warning circuit has to be hooked up for the generator or the alternator to start charging. And we've also got a check engine light or malfunction indicator light. 1991 Euro spec car actually isn't wired for a check engine light, so I reassigned one of the data lines from the ECU and hooked a light up across there. So that gives us the ability to have a check engine light and check the fault code diagnostics on this engine. Fuel pressure check we can do with the engine not running simply by jumping the fuel pressure connector right here to ground, and that should trigger the fuel pump. There it goes. We'll see maximum fuel pressure with the engine not running, reading about 45 psi or 3 bar. With the engine running, the fuel pressure will drop in proportion to the manifold pressure. With the engine running, we can do a load test on the alternator, and we'll also create a fault and see if the fault code diagnostics work. So there's no cooling system or exhaust system hooked up, so it's going to be a little bit noisy, and we're only going to run it for a limited period because of there being no cooling system. So let's go ahead and start it up. So there we created a fault and the check engine light came on. So now we can check to see if a fault code is stored. With the key off, we'll actually unhook our charge warning light because we don't need that anymore. And we'll put a jumper between the 10 terminal and the ground terminal in the diagnostic connector. This is the same jumper that you use if you're checking the ignition timing. Turn the key back on and see if we've stored a fault code. Check engine light comes on, goes out, has one long flash, long space, one long flash. So we've created a fault. That is actually a fault 10, not fault 1. Fault 1 is a short flash, fault 10 is a long flash. You can take a look at the fault codes, and pretty obviously it's going to be a airflow meter fault. Our oil pressure went up to about 50 psi. Of course, normally you would check oil pressure with the engine fully warmed up. Manifold pressure went up to a vacuum pressure or negative pressure of about 20 inches, and the fuel pressure dropped about half a bar, which is kind of roughly equivalent to the drop in manifold pressure. So that's a quick check out of our engine here. We'll turn the key off and let the diagnostics finish, and just let me know if there are any questions.